Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you unforgettable tales of resilience, love, and self-discovery. Today, we share the incredible journey of Tina, a young woman whose perfect life was turned upside down when the truth about her family came to light. Faced with heartbreak, betrayal, and the challenge of rebuilding her identity, Tina's story is a powerful reminder of the strength it takes to rise above life's hardest moments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join Life Stories as we dive into this inspiring tale of courage and hope. Let's begin today's journey together. Tina sat in her room, staring at the suitcase on her bed. Tears streamed down her face as she packed her belongings, each item a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. The home she had known for 23 years. The parents she had loved deeply. The world of privilege and security, it was all gone in an instant. She had been abandoned by the very people she thought would love her unconditionally. And she could hardly process the heartbreak. For as long as she could remember, Mr. and Mrs. Carter had been her world. They were warm, loving, and attentive, showering her with everything a child could ever want. Their wealth meant she grew up in a life of luxury, attending the best schools, wearing designer clothes, and traveling to exotic destinations. But it wasn't the material things that made her feel special, it was the way they treated her like their princess. Her father's nickname for her, "My Shining Star," echoed in her mind now, cutting through the pain of their rejection. Tina never questioned her place in their lives. She had always believed she was their biological daughter, the center of their universe. They had made her feel loved, protected, and cherished. Her friends envied her seemingly perfect family, and she wore that pride like a badge of honor. But everything changed one sunny afternoon. Tina had been reading in the garden when her mother called her inside. "We need to talk," her mother said, her voice unusually quiet. Tina sensed something was wrong. Her parents were always so confident and self-assured. But today, they seemed nervous, even fragile. In the living room, her father gestured for her to sit down. "Tina," he began hesitantly, "there's something we need to tell you. It's important." Tina's heart raced. She couldn't imagine what they had to say. But she braced herself, expecting news about the family business or perhaps a distant relative. What she heard instead shattered her world. "You're adopted," her father said, the words landing like a hammer. "We love you deeply. But we recently found our biological daughter." For a moment, Tina didn't understand. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm your daughter." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "When you were a baby, we adopted you after we lost Stephanie, our biological daughter. We searched for her for years but couldn't find her until now." The room spun. Tina felt like the ground was slipping out from under her. The parents she had trusted, the life she thought was hers, suddenly felt like an illusion. They went on to explain how they had found Stephanie and how, after all these years, they felt compelled to bring her back into their lives. Tina tried to hold on to some semblance of normalcy, but everything changed when Stephanie moved into their home. Unlike Tina, who had grown up with kindness and gratitude, Stephanie was demanding, rude, and selfish. She treated the Carters like servants and created chaos wherever she went. Tina thought her parents would see through Stephanie's behavior and appreciate the person she was. But the opposite happened. They began to pull away from Tina, devoting their time and attention to Stephanie instead. It wasn't long before the situation became unbearable. One evening, after yet another argument caused by Stephanie's antics, Mrs. Carter turned to Tina and said, "Maybe it's time for you to find a place of your own. You're an adult now, and Stephanie needs this space." Tina was stunned. "Are you asking me to leave?" she asked, her voice breaking. Her mother avoided her gaze. "It's for the best." Packing her bags that night, Tina felt a heartbreak she couldn't put into words. She was no longer the cherished daughter but an outsider in the family she had called her own. With no job, no savings, and no place to go, she felt utterly lost. The Carters hadn't just taken away her home, they had stripped her of her identity. Carrying her suitcase to the street, Tina took a deep breath, unsure of where to turn. It was then that her phone buzzed. The name on the screen brought a flicker of hope: Mr. Thompson. He was a close family friend who had known Tina since she was a child. "Tina," he said when she answered, his voice filled with concern. "I heard what happened. Come stay with me. You'll be safe here." Tina hesitated, but she had no other options. She agreed, and a car arrived shortly to pick her up. As it drove through the city toward Mr. Thompson's grand estate, Tina stared out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of sadness, confusion, and faint relief. Mr. Thompson welcomed her warmly, treating her with the kindness she desperately needed. His home was magnificent, a sprawling mansion with manicured gardens and a staff of attentive workers. But it wasn't home. No amount of luxury could replace the love and belonging she had lost. Still, Tina was grateful for Mr. Thompson's generosity and began to see him as a father figure. One day, while walking through the garden, she met David, Mr. Thompson's grandson. He was tall, handsome, and kind, with an easy smile that immediately put her at ease. "You must be Tina," he said, extending a hand. "Grandfather told me you'd be staying here." Tina shook his hand, her first genuine smile in days. "It's nice to meet you." As they talked, David's warmth and understanding gave Tina a glimmer of comfort. For the first time since leaving the Carters, she felt a spark of hope. Though her life had been turned upside down, perhaps there was still a way to rebuild, not as the Carters' daughter, but as Tina, someone strong enough to create a new future. Tina woke up the next morning to the soft sound of birds outside her window. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was, her mind still trapped in the familiar comfort of her old home. But as she opened her eyes and saw the elegant, unfamiliar room, reality came crashing back. She wasn't at the Carters' house. She wasn't their daughter anymore. She was in Mr. Thompson's mansion, starting a new chapter of her life. As the days passed, Tina found herself adjusting to her new surroundings. Mr. Thompson made every effort to make her feel at home, checking in on her regularly and encouraging her to explore the estate. He spoke to her with a warmth that reminded her of the father she had lost, and Tina began to lean on him for the support she desperately needed. But the loss of her old life still weighed heavily on her. She missed the sense of belonging she once felt with the Carters, the love she thought was unconditional. Now, she felt like a guest in a world she didn't truly belong to. The grandeur of Mr. Thompson's estate was impressive, but it was no substitute for the love and security she had lost. One day, while walking in the garden, Tina ran into David again. He was sitting on a bench under a large oak tree, flipping through a book. When he saw her, he smiled and waved her over. "Hey, Tina, come sit with me." Tina hesitated for a moment but then joined him. David had an easy way about him, a kind of quiet confidence that made her feel at ease. "How are you settling in?" he asked, his tone genuine. "It's different," Tina admitted, folding her hands in her lap. "Everyone's been so kind, but it's hard to feel at home." David nodded thoughtfully. "I can understand that. Grandfather told me what happened. I'm sorry you had to go through that." His words surprised her. Most people avoided the topic, unsure of how to address the pain she was carrying. But David didn't shy away from it. He looked at her with a sincerity that made her feel seen for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," Tina said softly. "It's been hard, but I'm trying to move forward." David smiled. "That's all you can do. One step at a time." As the weeks went on, Tina and David began spending more time together. He showed her around the estate, introduced her to his favorite spots, and even taught her how to play chess. Their conversations were light at first, but as they grew more comfortable with each other, Tina found herself opening up to him. She told him about her childhood, her love for painting, and the dreams she once had of traveling the world. David listened intently, always encouraging her to dream again. "You've been through so much," he said one evening as they walked along the garden path. "But I can see how strong you are. Don't let what happened define you." His words stayed with her, a small flame of hope igniting within her. For the first time since leaving the Carters, Tina began to believe that she could build a new life for herself. And as she spent more time with David, she couldn't ignore the way her heart began to stir when he was around. His kindness, his humor, the way he made her feel seen, it was all so unexpected, but so welcome. One evening, as the sun set over the estate, Tina and David sat on the garden bench again, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. There was a peaceful silence between them, but Tina's thoughts were anything but calm. She found herself wondering if David felt the same connection she did. But she pushed the thought aside. After all, she was just a guest here. A girl with no family, no money, and no future. How could someone like David, the grandson of a billionaire, ever feel the same way about her? But David seemed to sense her unease. "You've been quiet," he said, glancing at her. "What's on your mind?" Tina hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just grateful," she finally said. "For everything. For you." David smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made her heart race. "You don't have to thank me, Tina. I'm just glad I can be here for you." For a moment, Tina felt like the world had slowed down, the weight of her past fading into the background. In David's presence, she felt safe, understood, and maybe even a little hopeful. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, and she wasn't ready to let it go. The days turned into weeks, and Tina found herself settling into a rhythm at Mr. Thompson's estate. She spent her mornings helping Mr. Thompson organize his personal library, afternoons painting in the garden, and evenings with David. The sadness that had once consumed her began to loosen its grip, replaced by moments of quiet joy and a growing sense of purpose. David was a constant presence in her life, and their bond deepened with each passing day. He was patient and kind, always ready to listen when Tina wanted to talk about her past or share her dreams. He had an easy way of making her laugh, even when she didn't feel like smiling. Slowly, Tina began to see a future beyond the pain of her recent experiences. But not everyone in the Thompson family welcomed her presence. David's mother, Mrs. Thompson, had been polite to Tina at first, but her demeanor quickly turned cold. She made no effort to hide her disapproval, often reminding Tina, through subtle comments, of the gap between them. "It's kind of you to help in the library," she said one day, her tone sharp despite her words. "It must feel nice to have something to do." Tina smiled politely but felt the sting of the remark. Mrs. Thompson saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world. She avoided confrontations, focusing instead on the support she found in Mr. Thompson and David. But deep down, she worried that Mrs. Thompson's disapproval might drive a wedge between her and David. One evening, as Tina was helping David with paperwork in the living room, Mrs. Thompson walked in. Her expression was stern, and her presence immediately changed the atmosphere. "David," she said firmly, "I need to speak with Tina. Alone." David hesitated, glancing at Tina. "Mom, whatever it is, I'm sure it can wait." Mrs. Thompson's voice hardened. "David, this is a family matter." Reluctantly, David left the room, giving Tina a reassuring nod before closing the door behind him. Tina's heart raced as she faced Mrs. Thompson, who wasted no time getting to the point. "You don't belong here," Mrs. Thompson said coldly. "This family has worked hard to maintain its reputation, and we can't afford any distractions." Tina swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "I've done everything I can to stay out of the way. I don't want to cause trouble." Mrs. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Trouble? You've been spending too much time with David. He's my son, and I won't allow him to throw away his future for someone like you." You've already lost your family and your status. You have nothing to offer him. The words cut deep. Reopening wounds Tina had been trying to heal. She blinked back tears, determined not to let Mrs. Thompson see how much her words hurt. I care about David, she said quietly. But if you think my presence here is a problem, I'll leave. Mrs. Thompson's expression softened slightly, as though surprised by Tina's composure. That would be best, she said. Pack your things and leave tonight. Later that evening, Tina sat on her bed, staring at her half-packed suitcase. David burst into the room, his face filled with frustration. Tina, don't do this, he pleaded. You don't have to leave. My mom doesn't speak for me. Tina shook her head, tears streaming down her face. David, I love you. But your mother is right, I don't belong here. David knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. Tina, you're wrong. You belong here with me. I don't care what anyone else says. His words warmed her heart, but she had already made up her mind. I can't stay. David, I need to figure out who I am on my own. Before she left, Tina kissed David on the cheek, her heart breaking as she walked out of the mansion. She didn't know where she was headed, but she knew she couldn't let herself be defined by rejection any longer. As she stood outside with her bags, Tina took a deep breath and dialed Mr. Thompson's number. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I need your help. I need to know the truth about my past. Mr. Thompson's voice was warm and steady. Tina, my dear, I'll help you with whatever you need. Let's start this journey together. With renewed determination, Tina stepped into the car waiting for her, ready to face the next chapter of her life. This time, she wasn't running away. She was running toward the truth. As Tina stood outside her father's estate, her heart was full for the first time in years. The DNA test had confirmed the truth: she was Mr. Thompson's daughter. After so much loss and heartbreak, she had finally found where she truly belonged. The warmth of her father's embrace and the love of David, who stood unwavering by her side, reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. Tina's journey wasn't just about finding her biological family, it was about rediscovering herself. She had endured betrayal, rejection, and pain, but emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the life ahead of her. This story reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love and self-discovery. If Tina's journey inspired you, like and subscribe to Life Stories for more tales of hope and courage. See you in the next chapter.